now have the opportunity and the honor to make the concluding remarks. This has almost become a kind of tradition in these meetings. And every time there's a bet going on, who will have the real last word? Will it be me or Joreen? So the bet is on, we will see who will have the last word. But I will start in any way, and we'll see where we will go. I see that you're all still holding out, and there's a special word that's being used for sometimes if you visit museums, it's called museum fatigue. It's a professional term. And there's also the Florence syndrome, when you get overwhelmed by all the things you have seen and all the museums you have visited, and you start to realize we cannot cope and we cannot master all of this. Well, even after a very rich day where you saw and heard a lot of interesting things, you still look quite energetic. And so we will launch the term of IMP energy to when you go home. I will try not to claim too much of your time. I will make a few brief remarks. It has been an interesting journey the last 3-4 years. A lot of things changed and happened, both in the museological field, also in my life. And I liked that they programmed this video referring to a light tower, Faro, in a number of languages. Actually, I left that lighthouse to go explore not the far west. I really liked the joke, but to go to the academic world, where I tried to set up a new master and PhD program on heritage. And one of the things I'm exploring, can we set up a master in heritage studies / museology, intangible heritage, and other departments. So I also have the honor, at least this year, probably also the next year, to teach, among others, not only about intangible heritage, but also the course museum studies or museology. And so I'm reading a lot on museology recently. And one of the books I recently read was a book published by François Marès, a well-known museologist, Nouvelles tendances de la muséologie, published in 2016. And in that book, there's an article by Serge Chaumier, another famous museologist, and the title is Pourquoi la muséologie ne devra plus être une composante du patrimoine? Why museology or museums should no longer be part of heritage. And when I read the title and I started reading, I got very alarmed. So I'm setting up a new program. And actually one of the museologists is saying we should get out of this heritage paradigm. But then I started reading, and well, I will tell you which statement Serge Chaumier tries to make. So first he tells the story, and he reminded us that it was not always the case that museums are operating under that umbrella of heritage. And that's also the case, for instance, in this country, where this connection between Erfgoed and museums are really a 21st century story. And so Serge Chaumier said, well, the museums have been invited or even forced to function under this paradigm, and not everyone has embraced it to the full. I think this is also an experience that I recognize. On the other hand, and that was one of my jobs in Faro, I really had to promote the heritage idea, and I think it's useful that this policy decision was made to connect the two and to put the umbrella of heritage on top of it. And the same was, for instance, dealing with popular culture, with traditions, the notion of intangible heritage. That's also a political and conceptual revolution and evolution, where this concept is working as an umbrella to embrace everything. So in the next part of his article, Serge Chaumier mentioned the evolution in the museum world. And he actually pointed at the elements that David Villaume from Nemo earlier today called a mega trend. And you have all the important buzzwords you should know. And that's what I try to tell to my students. These are the buzzwords you should know and use: participation, co-creation, involving, engagement, and so on, stakeholder involvement. So all these concepts were there, and in so-called new museology, but there have been many new museologists since then, these are the words that are being used. Next to the very strong focus on collections and collection management, this is the mega trend that is evolved. In the next part of his article, and that's where the title comes from, Chaumier says, well, he's a bit worried that this mega trend is not so stable and not so not as certainly as some people might think. And he points out that there can be a number of policy evolutions, budget cuts, political decisions that try to turn back the clock and to refocus on collections. And that's where he got his title from. For him, patrimoine is basically about collections, and he is afraid that this emphasis on collections by using the word patrimoine will actually influence the evolution and will blow away that whole participation idea. So, so his advice is, well, let's, as museum professionals who embrace these participation, co-creation, etc., let's try to get out of the heritage game and to either rename the whole field and try to escape. And so I said, wait a minute, as a specialist in intangible heritage, what is he talking about? Do I get this right? That's not how I perceive what heritage is. Another element that Chaumier hints at, it's a sensitivity for issues like climate change and the fact that the world still can be improved, that there's a lot of inequality. Since he published this article, the Agenda 2030 is getting momentum, and it is in the sensitivity for all these issues that we should concern, both for the planet and people. This is influencing also the museum world. And I refer here to the important discussions that the museum sector, especially ICOM, has been doing, especially the last year, about the museum definition, challenging the older definition with a lot of emphasis on the collection. And actually, and Professor Gala mentioned it, this new manifesto definition, pointing at all those challenges, that this discussion is going on in the museum world. And in Kyoto, unfortunately, they decided not to decide anything and to postpone the discussion. So that's the good news, the discussion is still going on. So if I look at these evolutions and I look what is happening in the world of intangible heritage, and to see all the previous conferences focusing on diversity, participation, urbanized society, innovation, and how this affects culture policies, there all these elements that Chaumier was worried about were put on the agenda under the label of intangible heritage and how it can be influenced. So in today and in the previous meeting and in the book, you have all the emphasis on communities, groups, and individuals, stakeholders, and so on. And a discussion was going on about the difference between tangible and intangible heritage. And I even heard the notion that tangible and intangible heritage are two sides of the coin. But actually, I disagree with that. And that's what I put in my article. I think it's a false dichotomy, and it's a dangerous dichotomy. And that's why I like that, for instance, the word living heritage is introduced to try to escape. A lot of emphasis was put on so-called transition and transition phases, the notion of third space, which is on the title of the book. So it's an enigmatic title, but it refers to the concept of liminality that Professor Gala also put forward. So a zone full of negotiation and deep information. So what I see here, luckily I can say I do no longer agree with the proposal by Chaumier, said, oh, let's not give up the heritage concept already. And apparently there are zones of connection between what is discussions in the museum world and what intangible heritage is doing in the whole heritage field. And in the book, there are a lot of interesting elements that can be read. What I particularly like, and I discovered it today, is what you find on page 110 to 119. And it's titled The Reference Framework, Key Text and Networks. And especially page 110 and 111 are interesting because to go forward strategically, a lot of the levers and things one could do are identified in that scheme. So, and I think it's interesting to read it from a more distant perspective on how the next phase could evolve. From Professor Gala, we heard a very interesting story. I didn't know how intangible heritage worked its way into the definition of museums, the definition that is still valid. And he referred to the meeting in Seoul, the Seoul resolution, the new journal that was published. I think it's a very important phase in the discussion between museums and intangible heritage. Today, and with the IMP project, we're going for the next phase. And I think it's relaunching a debate. In UNESCO, a lot of things happened, and that's what you find on that page 110. The 2003 convention, it got reinforced with a number of operational directives, especially the 6th chapter linking it to the Agenda 2030 on sustainable development goals, the ethical principles, and now the new kid on the block, the overall results framework. On the other page, page 111, you find another ingredient of the recipe, and that's focusing on the Faro Convention, the Convention on the Value of Cultural Heritage for Society, holding a lot of interesting keys to work with. It refers to a number of recent European Union recommendations where cultural heritage is presented as a strategic resource for a sustainable Europe. Last year we had the European Year of Heritage, where all those elements linking it to sustainable development and embracing, at least on paper, intangible cultural heritage as part of the element were there. Here there's also a reference to a new resolution on safeguarding and enhancing intangible cultural heritage in Europe, made by the Council of Europe last year. It's the recommendation that still has to be discovered. And it's a well-known secret that there's a link with the IMP project that directly authors of that, the real authors of that resolution were linked to the IMP project. You have to find out how, that's for research. So at least all those elements are there, and they're there to be activated. So another thing I want to emphasize is this problem that Chaumier identified. How important are collections and museums, and how strongly are they connected? As you know, there's a lot of pressure on that close link between collections and museums. For instance, the virtual museum, how does this add up with the rest? So my idea is to let's continue that discussion about what is a museum, how does it fit with dealing with collections and also repertoires, and how can we move forward? Chaumier, in his article, he decided let's replace the word patrimoine by matrimoine, and emphasizing on a much more fruitful perspective. This joke only works in French, I'm afraid. So heritage by a female version of heritage, how can you combine it? So it's an interesting idea, but I would work within that space of heritage and see what happens. So for a follow-up, there are a number of ways that this immediately can have effect, this project, because the people behind the project managed to create a number of levers and a number of concrete instruments. We have the book, which is important, the toolkit. We have the declaration that you just heard in a number of languages, which really is an interesting statement. We have the network that is there. So all this is there to try and further the discussion. So ICOM will pick it up, so they promised. NEMO, UNESCO will launch launch this both in the 2003 convention community and the museum community. It will also, this results will also be presented at the next high-level meeting of the Association for Critical Heritage Studies in London, so where professional heritage scholars can learn about what is being discussed here. I am very much looking forward to if there will be a follow-up on this project, either from museums, and I think Janet Blake already gave a hint to make the link with the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals as a very convincing way of progressing. So I think if you look at it, and then I will conclude, I think that there's a marvelous job that has been done. You can be very critical about these European projects. In this project, they managed to come up with all those tools, and they were ready today, which is already a surprise. And this was not by accident, it's by a lot of very short nights or no nights at all of sleep of a number of people, not only the people involved in the project, the different partners, but especially the people working in the workshop Intangible Heritage. And I mentioned Evelyn, Joreen, and Kia, but also their colleagues have been working very hard on this topic. So I really want to salute them and to thank you all for them. And as you might have guessed, and sorry for the people who will lose their bet, I will give the very last word to Joreen. Thank you very much.